The north had seen many winters. Storms had buried entire villages beneath mountains of snow. Seas had frozen so hard that warriors could march across them with shields and spears. Monsters had risen from the forests, and dragons had burned the skies. But nothing had ever looked like this. The Black Aurora did not fade. 3 nights had passed since the Omen appeared above the frozen lands, yet the sky remained wounded. A massive shadow stretched across the heavens like a scar across the world. The stars behind it had vanished, and the cold had grown deeper, not the natural cold of winter, something heavier, something ancient. In the village of Scarnford, no one slept anymore. The warriors sat beside their fires, sharpening axes that had already tasted war. Mothers whispered prayers to gods that had not answered in centuries. Even the bravest hunters refused to enter the forest after sunset, because the forest was no longer silent, it was watching. Leif, the youngest warrior of the village, stood at the edge of the settlement and stared toward the mountains. The Black Aurora pulsed above them like a slow heartbeat. Beside him stood the old seer, Huldrych. "The sky is bleeding," Leif muttered. Huldrych did not answer immediately. Instead, the old man raised his staff and pointed toward the northern horizon. "It is not bleeding," Leif frowned. "What then?" Huldrich's voice was barely a whisper. "It is opening, far beyond the fjords, deep in the northern glaciers." Something had already begun to change. The ice that had stood unmoving for 10,000 years had started to crack. At first the sound was small, a faint groan deep within the frozen mountains, but the crack spread. Through tunnels of ancient ice, through frozen caverns where no sunlight had ever reached, and finally into a chamber older than the kingdoms of men. A prison. Massive chains carved from black stone stretched across the cavern walls. Symbols burned into the ice by forgotten gods flickered with dying light. For thousands of years they had held, now they trembled. The Black Aurora above the world pulsed again, and one of the chains snapped. The creature beneath the glacier moved, slowly, like a mountain waking from sleep. Its breath alone melted entire walls of ancient ice. Its eyes opened, glowing faintly in the darkness like to dying stars. It had waited longer than human history, longer than the kingdoms of Midgard, longer even than the gods had ruled the north. But now something had called to it, a signal from the sky itself, the same signal that had darkened the aurora and silenced the beasts of the forests. The creature lifted its massive head, and for the first time in thousands of years, it listened. Back in Scarnford, the sea had begun to change again. The fishermen gathered along the frozen docks, staring at the dark water below. The ocean was moving, not with waves, but with slow, deep currents that rolled beneath the surface like something breathing beneath the sea. One old sailor dropped his torch. "Something is down there." No one argued, because every man along the shore felt it. The same feeling spreading across the north. Something had awakened. That night, the Black Aurora grew brighter. The shadow across the sky twisted and stretched like a living storm. Huldrych gathered the warriors inside the village hall. The fire in the center of the room crackled violently as snow pounded against the wooden walls. "You have all seen the sky," the old seer said. The warriors nodded silently. Huldrych stepped closer to the fire. "What you see above us is not a storm." Leif crossed his arms. "And what is it?" Huldrich's blind eye stared into the flames. "It is a signal." The warriors shifted uneasily. "A signal to who?" someone asked. Huldrych looked toward the door, toward the north, to everything that sleeps beneath the world. Outside the hall, the wolves had returned again. But this time they were not alone. From the deeper forests beyond the mountains, larger shapes moved through the snow, creatures that had not walked the earth since the age of giants. Something massive passed between the trees. The wolves lowered their heads as it moved. Not in fear. In recognition. The Black Aurora pulsed once more across the sky, and far beneath the glaciers of the north, the ancient creature began to rise. Ice shattered above it, mountains trembled, and the prison that had held it since the dawn of the world finally broke apart. The creature lifted its head toward the surface, toward the sky that had called to it, toward the Black Aurora, because the signal had been heard. The first omen had already appeared. Now the second sign had come. The sky itself was awakening the ancient powers of the world, and the north was no longer safe. The Black Aurora had begun the awakening, and this was only the beginning. If you enjoyed this Viking dark fantasy story, like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter of Frozen Saga. New monsters, ancient legends, and forgotten gods are awakening across the frozen north. This saga is far from over.